of what these trillion-dollar deficits we have each year are, then I would tell you that these deficits are like a cancer. And over time, they will destroy our country from within. Let me give you just one mathematical example. If you look at the operating statement of the country last year, and I'm not talking about 20 years ago or 20 years from now, I'm talking about last year. Every single dollar of revenue that came into the country from every source was consumed by the spending on interest on the debt and the spending on what we call our mandatory items. Mandatory items are principally what we spend on the entitlement programs of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So what does that mean to you all? It means that every single dollar we spent last year on these two wars, national security, homeland security, education, infrastructure, and high value-added research was borrowed. And half of it was borrowed from foreign countries. Now, when I talk with groups like you, the first question I always get is why? Why would we do this? That's crazy. What in the world are we spending this money on? And I always try to turn it around and ask you, what do you think we're spending the money on? And you know what most people tell me? They say, oh, waste, fraud, and abuse, foreign aid, Nancy Pelosi's airplane, oil subsidies. You can take those things and put them in a thimble compared to what the real causes of our problems are today. There are 5 principal challenges that our country faces today. 5 principal challenges that the Congress of the U.S. and the President have to meet if we're going to solve our long-term fiscal problems. Write them down. And the next time you see a politician, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, ask them what they're going to do to beat these challenges. The number one challenge by far that our nation faces today is health care. We spend twice as much as any other developed country in the world, whether you talk about it as a percent of GDP or on a per capita basis, on health care. And you know, that might be all right if our outcomes were twice as good as any other country. But they're not. We rank somewhere between 25th and 50th in such important measures as life expectancy, infant mortality, and preventable death. And you know those 32 million people that don't have health care insurance? They get health care. They just get it today at the emergency room at 5 to 8 times the cost it'd be in the doctor's office. And you know who pays for that? You do. That cost doesn't go away. It gets cost shifted to you in the form of higher taxes and higher insurance costs. In 1981, the federal government spent 10% of its budget on health care. Today, we spend 25% of the budget on health care. By the year 2020, we'll be spending a third of the budget on health care. And it won't be long before all we'll be able to do is take care of a couple old coots like me and buy a few tanks. Health care is our biggest problem. The second biggest challenge we face is defense. We spend more on national defense in our country than the next 17 largest countries combined. That includes both Russia and China. I believe that America is bearing a disproportionate responsibility for global world peace. And I don't think America can afford to be the world's policeman. And I think Admiral Mullen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under both President Bush and President Obama, got it right when he was asked what our nation's greatest national security problem is. He didn't say these terrorists. He said it's these deficits, because they will consume every dollar of resource that we can muster. Let me give you an example of how crazy the situation is today. America has a treaty with Taiwan that will protect Taiwan if they're invaded by the Chinese. There's just one problem with that. We'll have to borrow the money from China to do it. Defense is number 2. Number 3 is our tax code. We have the most inefficient, ineffective, globally anti-competitive tax code that man could dream of. I could ask the finance professors at Chapel Hill to design one, and they couldn't design a stupider one than we have today. What our commission recommended was that we broaden the base, we simplify the code, and we get rid of all the backdoor spending in the tax code. We only net $1.3 trillion a year in income taxes. 1.1 from individuals, 200 billion from corporations. And the reason we net such a little amount and have such, nominally high tax rates is because of this $1.1 trillion of spending in the tax code. If you broaden the base, simplify the code, and wipe out those deductions and credits, many of which I enjoy, you can take marginal income tax rates to 8% up to $70,000, 14% up to $210,000, and have a maximum marginal income tax rate of 23%. You can take the corporate rate to 26%, and you can pay for a territorial system so that $1.5 trillion that's today captured overseas can be brought back to the U.S. to create jobs over here. Now, we think that makes a lot more sense. My Democratic friends, give me a lot of trouble about a territorial system. They say that if our corporations are allowed to bring that money back here, all they'll do is dividend it out or use it to buy back stock. And I say, great. At least that money will be circulating here and not over there. The good news, and what this recommendation implies, is we only used 92% of that $1.1 trillion a year to reduce rates. We used 8%, or about $100 billion a year, to reduce the deficit. $100 billion a year over 10 years is where we get the $1 trillion of revenue in our $4 trillion package to reduce the deficit over the next decade. So changing our income tax code is number 3. Number 4 is Social Security. Social Security, like it or not, is $900 billion cash negative over the next decade. Now, we've had lots of people look at us and say, oh gosh, don't mess with Social Security. You're trying to throw Granny off the cliff. And I said, no. What we're trying to do is to make Social Security sustainably solvent. You know, this guy, Roosevelt, was a pretty smart guy. When he created Social Security, average life expectancy was 63. You got Social Security at 65. That is a very smart guy. Today, average life expectancy is 78. You get Social Security at 62. We have an arithmetic problem. One of the ways we tried to fix that was to increase the retirement age. We raised it 1 year, 40 years from now. We wanted to give people a chance to get ready. And 1 more year, 65 years from now, when my grandchildren will be eligible. But making very small changes today in Social Security can make it sustainably solvent and make sure it actually is there for our children and grandchildren when they need it. The 5th biggest problem we face is our old friend compound interest. Today we spend about $250 billion a year on interest, even at today's really low interest rates. If interest rates were at their median level they were in the 1990s or the first decade of this year, we'd be spending about $650 billion a year on interest. But even at $250 billion a year, to put that in some kind of relative basis, that's more than we spend at the Department of Commerce, Education, Energy, Interior, Homeland Security, Justice, and State combined. And if we do nothing, we take that old ostrich theory and just stick our heads in the ground. By the year 2020, we'll be spending over $1 trillion a year on interest cost alone. Think about that. That's not only $1 trillion a year we can't spend in this country to educate our kids or to build our infrastructure or to do high value-added research in this country so the next new thing is created here. It's $1 trillion a year that will be spent principally in Asia to educate their kids, to build their infrastructure, to do that research over there so the next new thing is created there, not here, and the jobs of the future are over there, not here. That's crazy. And any politician that comes up to you, whether they're a Republican or Democrat, and says, oh, don't worry about this, we can grow our way out of this problem. You do the math. We could have double-digit growth for the next decade, and that alone won't solve this problem. And any Democrat who comes up and tells you, oh, don't worry, we can tax our way out of this problem. Well, raising taxes doesn't do a darn thing to change the demographics of this country or to change the fact that healthcare is growing at a faster rate than GDP. And as much as I'd like to tell you that we can simply cut our way out of this problem, we can't. We can't cut our way out of this problem without hurting the truly disadvantaged, disrupting a very fragile economic recovery, or without really doing real damage to the economy, without making the kind of cuts in education and infrastructure and research that will make it difficult for us to compete and compete effectively in what is today a knowledge-based global economy. So what our commission recommended was making sure that we could cut $4 trillion out of a deficit over the next decade. And, people ask me all the time, why $4 trillion? Why is that the right amount? Why is it some lower number? Why do we have to do that much? We took $1 trillion from reforming the tax code and $3 trillion from making real cuts in spending. And the reason you have to do at least $4 trillion is that's the minimum amount you have to cut the deficit in order to stabilize the debt and get it on a downward path as a percent of GDP. We got a majority of Republicans on our commission to vote for this package, a majority of Democrats, and a supermajority of the commission. And what made me the happiest of all was the breadth of viewpoints of the people voting yes. We had 6 sitting U.S. senators on our commission. 5 of the 6 voted yes, all 3 Republicans and 2 out of the 3 Democrats. And it was everybody from your own Dick Durbin, and I don't know how you can get more liberal than Dick Durbin from Illinois, to Tom Coburn, the extremely conservative Republican from Oklahoma. And they voted for it because they believed it was the right thing to do. And today, we face what people call the fiscal cliff. Do nothing, and we will rue the day. We have $7.2 trillion worth of economic events that if we do nothing, will hit our nation right in the gut in December of this year. It's the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, the expiration of the payroll tax, the expiration of the patch that's put over the AMT so it won't hit the middle class. It's the expiration of some unemployment benefits, and it's the sequester, which are those mindless, senseless, across-the-board cuts that came about because of the failure of a supercommittee. None of you who were trying to put your fiscal house in order would take mindless, senseless, across-the-board cuts in order to meet your objectives. You would go in there and try to cut your budget in a surgical manner so that you wouldn't cut those things that are the most productive. Well, that's what we face. And almost any economist will tell you that if we do nothing, the adverse effects on the economy in 2013 will be enough to throw us back into recession. Most economists will tell you that it will slow down and reduce economic growth from 3 to 5%, and we're only growing today at about 1.5%. It's enough to throw another 2 million people out of work and to raise unemployment to about 9%. And what has your Congress been doing about it? What have they been doing in Washington? Absolutely nothing. If any of you all had in your businesses the same relative amount of economic impacts coming to you in December of this year, you would have been working on it all year long. You would not have let your analysts, your people, sleep for a day. And we are doing absolutely nothing. And the Congress comes back into session on November 13th. And they're going to work a grand total of 15 days before the end of the year. That is crazy. And why I came tonight was because this group here has the ability, through your clients, through your employees, through your friends and neighbors, to put pressure on the Congress and the administration to act. You know, while the rest of the country has been suffering through what I believe is a very fragile economic recovery, what they've been having in Washington has been an election. The longer I stayed in Washington, the more I believe that Hubert Humphrey got it right when he described it as 26 square miles surrounded by reality. Let me tell you what we've been doing, and then we'll take some questions. Al Simpson and I have spent the last 9 months taking our little 64-page report and putting it in legislative language. That means we've taken this 64-page report, which is in plain English, that uses words like going broke. And we've now put it in legislative language, so it's 650 pages. And I swear to goodness, it's unintelligible. But we've been taking that around to members of the Congress. And we now have about 47 members of the Senate who are supporting us, 24 Republicans and 23 Democrats. And we have about 150 members of the House of Representatives who are, again, about an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. Now, that's not 218 in the House, which it takes to get something passed, and it's not 60 that it takes in the Senate. But we have made real progress in getting people to listen and understand the extent of the problem. We've also formed a CEO Fiscal Leadership Council. You might have seen last week, 80 of the Fortune 200 CEOs took out an ad in the Wall Street Journal saying, God, we have to do something. We have to come together. We got to start working together. We got to put some of this partisanship aside and pull together, not apart, and address this critical fiscal problem in a balanced manner. And lastly, we have a social media campaign called Fix the Debt, fixthedebt.org, where we've had about 300,000 people already sign a petition urging our members of Congress to act. Our hope is that common sense will overrule partisanship, and during the lame duck session, we can get the members of Congress to come together with the administration on a framework deal to reduce the deficit by $4 trillion over the next decade, to have a down payment that has real clarity and real substance, that includes both revenues and spending cuts, and also has a timeline to get it done by June of next year, and has a fail-safe provision that will require at least 67 votes to overturn it so we can address this urgent need of the country. I am truly worried that we may not. If we do, I think the future of this country is very, very, very bright. But you can already see in your clients, they're starting to lay people off because of the uncertainty. They're delaying capital expenditures. They're hoarding cash. Capital is on strike because they can't wait to December to get ready for this fiscal cliff. They have to start now. What I want you to do is to urge your members of Congress to do what this famous Nobel Prize winning scientist said to his team. His Nobel Prize winning project was running out of money. And he turned to his team and said, hey, we're running out of money. Now we got to start thinking. That's what America is. We're running out of money. Now we got to start thinking. We got to make for tough choices. We got to make for hard political choices. If we do, America can compete with the best and brightest wherever they are. And if we don't, we're well on our way to becoming a second-rate power. Please, do this for your kids. Do it for your grandkids. Do it for yourself. But do it. Do it for our country. We need you. Thank you very much.